Canada's announcement, saying the stance will make it very hard for the U.S. to make a trade deal with them. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced yesterday that Canada is planning to recognize the state of Palestine at a meeting of the United Nations in September. The move follows France and Britain's pledge to do the same. However, the UK said they will only do it if Israel does not meet certain conditions, which include agreeing to a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel and the U.S. both rejected Carney's statements. Canada and the U.S. are working on a negotiation deal of trade by tomorrow. Canada could face 35% tariffs if no deal is reached. Carney said yesterday that tariff negotiations have been constructive, but the talks may not finish by the deadline. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is in Israel today, meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Witkoff is working to make progress on Gaza ceasefire talks. Shortly after the envoy's arrival, President Trump posted on Truth Social, "The fastest way to end the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages." Indirect ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas terrorists in Qatar ended in a deadlock last week. Israel says it wants Hamas to release all remaining hostages. Hamas, meanwhile, wants Israeli troops to withdraw completely from Gaza, among other demands. Israel's public broadcaster reports that Witkoff is also scheduled to visit an aid distribution site in Gaza during his trip. And joining us now to discuss the tensions surrounding the moves by some nations to plan to recognize Palestinian statehood is David Wormser, Middle East Affairs Analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former Senior Advisor to U.S. Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and Strategic Affairs. David, good afternoon. Good to see you again. So the Canadian Prime Minister is saying that Canada plans to recognize Palestinian statehood, but it's under the condition that there will be reforms, right, by the Palestinian Authority. Do you see these conditions being met at some point? Your overall thoughts on it?
You know, already in 2003, we had the Rose Garden speech by President Bush, where he said that there has to be a leadership untainted by both terrorism and corruption. And we have tried reforming the Palestinian Authority for now 2 decades, and it hasn't worked every single time, because the essence of the government there is essentially a corrupt government, a kleptocracy. It's the only reason why it continues to survive in some ways. So I can't see Canada may suspend or announce that its conditions are met, but the reality is they won't be.
Okay, definition-wise, can you walk us through this? What does it mean actually for a country to recognize Palestine? What would its borders be, and the main governing body is recognizing Palestine a symbolic gesture? Because it seems like, at least, different countries have different approaches to recognition.
Well, there are some countries who would recognize Palestine to replace Israel, for example, Iran and others. There are other countries that would think or imagine that it would be the 67 borders, which on that map that you have up are those grayish-green areas, rather than the more yellowish. But in the United States and Israel have maintained that there's no legal requirement for Israel to give up any of it or all of it. And as a result, there's no real border that is recognized here. Apart from that, there's no real legal foundation to recognize a Palestinian state. There's no prior Palestinian state that ever existed. So there's no authority or group of people who represent the Palestinians with any legal basis for declaring a state, because they've never had sovereignty. So therefore, they're not what's under international law called a high contracting authority. The only ones who've ever had sovereignty in that area ever in history that still are around are the Israelis, the Jewish people. So there's no real legal foundation to it either, apart from the fact that it also violates various agreements from the past. So I think it's all a dead letter, but it's a lot of virtue signaling at the expense of the hostages.
Right. And Canada is just the latest country, right? There's France as well, the UK as well, moving toward recognition. But why now? Why are they moving toward recognizing Palestine now?
Well, I think they're moving toward it now as part of it's a payoff. I mean, unfortunately, you saw that the French leader went to Qatar. Qatar is willing to give French economy, infused French economy with $11 billion, which Macron needs a lot. Plus, there's a great deal of fear over the domestic Muslim populations in countries like France or Britain, and so forth. So there's this real feeling that as the Gaza war continues, there's a loss of control of circumstances, plus heavy pressure from the Qataris, who have money.
Hey, David, I can still see you, but your picture is rotated 180 degrees. All right, so we'll just move on. Okay. Okay, David. So while we're fixing this, you know, you're talking about the recognition of Palestine and its borders, and you're saying it doesn't really, you know, have concrete borders, and as well, there's really no existing authority there that if you're recognizing the state, that there will be an actual effective government by the end of that recognition process. So those are also very good points, David, if you can still hear me.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so my next question to you is, there's a lot of arguments being thrown out here in support of recognizing Palestine. What do you say to whether recognizing it as a state will actually provide tangible help to the people in Gaza?
Well, it probably won't. The most, in terms of actual help of both welfare, food, economic growth, freedom, and so forth, the real heyday of the greatest freedom was under full Israeli occupation. Even though they didn't have sovereignty, they had a lot of rights under Israeli military authority, and they certainly had tremendous economic growth. Under the Palestinian Authority and under Hamas, you've seen these populations suffer horribly. They're awful tyrannies. The one in Gaza was a jihadist-run place. You saw Christianity catastrophically collapse in the Palestinian-run areas over the last 20, 30 years. So really, in terms of outright welfare, but you know, humans are more than just welfare. It's also a question of identity and dignity and so forth. And that's where the Israelis can't quite provide what maybe an autonomous government would. But at this point, it's very difficult to see what can be done other than full Israeli occupation, because the various governments that have ruled over the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, they simply used the population. First of all, educated them into martyrdom and death. They became a death cult with the government. And the second thing is they used that to launch attacks on Israel and create bloodshed. So while from 67 to 1995, when you had, before any peace agreements and there was full Israeli occupation, there really wasn't all that much conflict that resulted in dead Palestinians and Israelis. But since then, you've had wave after wave of violence that's claimed thousands of Palestinian lives. So arguably right now, in terms of just human rights and welfare for Palestinians, one of the best things that can happen is just we stop, we pause, we pull back, the Israelis reassert some control, and then we sort of start over and figure out how we're going to deal with the population, because at the end of the day, they do need some form of dignity and identity. And second of all, the Israelis really don't want to absorb the population, because you're talking millions of people, and Israel's only a country of 10 million, and they don't want to become a minority in their own country.
So you don't think Palestinian recognition will help negotiation efforts or ceasefire talks in Gaza?
No, I think it'll do the opposite, because what happens is Hamas now is winning without having to negotiate. It is now able to tell the Palestinian people, we have gotten what nobody else has gotten. We have gotten recognition. And therefore, what we did on October 7th worked, and our holding of the hostages worked, and the continued attacks and warfare with Israel have worked. And they leverage that for their political power. So I think it actually incentivizes Hamas to hold on to the hostages forever and not reach a ceasefire. So I think that's why I said it's virtue signaling at the expense of the hostages.
Do you think the U.S. feels at all pressured with more countries moving toward, or planning at least, recognizing Palestine?
Well, I think the administration sees it the way the Israelis see it. They're quite nervous that President Trump put a lot of his credibility on the line to help Israel and help Palestinians who oppose Hamas to come to a ceasefire as well as release the hostages. He keeps having the hostages in the White House and so forth. And here, Hamas doesn't even want a deal, and the talks are now, ever since they were moving forward, and we were awfully close 2 weeks ago. But since this wave of recognition of the Palestinians began, the talks have completely collapsed. And I think the United States is as frustrated about that as Israel is at this point.
Okay, just to wrap up here, can I get your comments on a UN conference on Tuesday issuing a declaration calling for Hamas to disarm? Talk to us about what does it mean and how significant is it?
The irony is that as Europe is moving toward recognizing a Palestinian state, the Arab League, in unity, decided to demand the surrender of Hamas. So you have the Arab League actually taking, in some ways, a more pro-Israeli line and helpful line than the European Union was taking, or nations within the European Union are taking. So I think this conference on Tuesday, while sponsored by Saudi Arabia, the Saudis have focused more on Hamas surrendering power and, yes, providing a horizon politically for a state. But the Europeans have focused exclusively on the state part of it. And that's where the real meltdown begins. At the end of the day, though, a two-state solution right now is a dead letter. The Israelis, after October 7th, see that as an existential, mortal threat to their existence, and they're just not going to give in.
Well, okay, David, it's good to talk to you today.
Thank you.
Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says